Welcome to Digital Picnics. I'm Lily Daniels from 1719 and my co-host today is Alex Clark, award-winning Alex Clark.
Oh, I didn't change my name.
No
Well, we'll have to live with it.
longer above average, exceeding expectations.
But it begins with E's. It needs to be A's. It has to be alliteration.
Okay,
Do better.
so award-winning Alex is fine. You'll accept award-winning Alex. If you didn't know,
I'll accept this, yes.
Alex is very important now. He won I get the title right, Achieving Impact Through Innovation Award for the Marsh Christian Volunteer Awards for the Status Conservation Trust. And he gives such a lovely speech at the prize giving. I'll see if the CCT have shared a link so that you can view it and I'll pop it in the comments. But well done, Alex.
Thank you very much, Lily.
Grabbing the digital picnics nationally. I should also mention this is the second Marsh Christian Trust Award that 1719 have won. So we are clearly Sunderland volunteers are the best.
Yes, very exclusive group.
We'll take no questions on that. They are the best. Brilliant. So today we're talking about inclusion, and we decided that we would pre-record this for a couple of reasons. Most of the speakers that we were able to organize conversations with couldn't make it to the live, so it didn't make sense to play pre-recorded videos over live. So all of this is pre-recorded, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't leave comments and questions in the comments. We'll be answering those or sending them to speakers to address. So please do engage below with any kind of comments, questions, suggestions, because our approach, both mine and Alex's approach and 1719's, is that inclusion is about getting as many people's voices heard, getting as many opinions as we can, and working with them, not just saying this is how things are going to be. So yeah. Do be vocal, whether that's in comments, questions, or even just sending us a quick message. So to kick us off, Alex, as a member of the Curious Curators, you've been looking at a bunch of stories from Sunderland, and your focus has been, and I find this really interesting, on sort of women's stories and how women have operated in Sunderland during different eras. And of course, because you're award-winning Alex Clark, that football comes into that.
Yes, prompt of the day to my footballing obsession that I'm sure people are very well sick of listening to on here now. But yes, there's a noted history of women in sport in Sunderland, and hang about. I mean, for as long as there's been Sunderland as a city, there's been Sunderland Football Club. Football runs through the DNA of most any Mackem, young, old, from various walks of life. You don't have to be from Sunderland. You don't have to sound like me. You don't have to look like me, which is the definition of inclusion. Over the years, Sunderland have had some absolutely highly celebrated local people play for their club, including England's current and the only England number one that I will accept, Jordan Pickford, Champions League winning captain Jordan Henderson, Premier League winning captain now as well. However, Sunderland's international claim to fame as far as women's football goes started well before Jordan was winning. That is Jordan Henderson, rather. Jordan Henderson was winning the Champions League. Women's football has risen immensely over the last few years with stars like Ada Hegerberg and Megan Rapinoe, Alex Morgan, and the infamous Brazilian wonder that is Marta, igniting a global interest in what should have always been heavily interesting. But Sunderland has their own claim to fame in that regard as well. Well, since the founding of Sunderland ladies team, they've set about producing some of the most phenomenal women's talent that have graced the women's English national team, including players such as Carly Telford, Steph Horton, MBE, the current World Player of the Year, Lucy Bronze, who is originally from Berwick but joined Sunderland at the age of 16 and is one of let me see if I can get this right. She is one of a very small number of defenders to win the Ballon d'Or. I think off the top of my head, I think it's only Fabio Cannavaro that's run it recently, and that was over 15 years ago, and joins players of the likes of Franz Beckenbauer, Sir Bobby Moore, Paolo Maldini, Roberto Carlos, and Virgil van Dijk to have been nominated for that award, and is the first player to have made the top three, let alone win it, since Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard back in 2005. So, and there is an immense history on the women's side of Sunderland football as well that doesn't get as much attention, you might say, compared to the city dominating fanfare that exists around the men's team, myself included in that, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware now.
And we found history, like we found stories of women's groups playing on the town moor, and was there? I'll let you fill in the gaps in that story, because I know there are two that are quite similar.
So there were a few, like women's football has existed in a non-professional manner for over 100 years in Sunderland. There were teams that used to play on the town moor that were just made up of women who wanted to play football and didn't see why their gender should exclude them from playing the sport. Sunderland's women's team, the official women's Sunderland team, wasn't actually formally integrated into Sunderland AFC structure until 2013. It was partly before then. It actually began as a ladies' five-a-side team called the Kestrels. But in the year 2000, having won promotion to the FA Women's Premier League, they merged with another ladies' team to form Sunderland Women's FC. And 24 years of breaking boundaries through that history, it took for them to eventually be recognised as part of the Sunderland AFC structure on the wider form. But they've not always been connected in that as well, since Sunderland's you might say financial trouble. The women's team's has suffered greatly. They were kicked out of the top division of women's football when they were doing really, really well some years ago, and lost a lot of their players. Simply, I can't even remember why. I think it was something to do with funding and things like that, and bigger teams, more financially secure Premier League teams like Manchester United and clubs with that sort of monetary backing, that through no fault of their own, they weren't relegated, they were removed from the top division.
Well, I think it's an interesting perspective, because like you say, in football, that like tremendous strides have been made with things like show racism, the red card, the work that Kieran Brady did with sort of tackling homophobia, and breaking down barriers in a kind of attitude of the best person should be playing, and their protected characteristics sort of don't come into talent. But it's interesting then that women's football in Sunderland has like a really proud history, but one that maybe is a bit underground. I think it's worth saying, and I think it's worth we're going to keep going with it. If you have any stories of women footballers, I know that at least someone who watches the Digital Lives mother used to play. So we'd like to see that in the comments, please.
Very interesting.
throwing down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
And of course, women aren't the only aspect of trying to make sure that you're telling an inclusive story. I mentioned it in the conversation that we're going to hear with Kaylee Mitchell and Taisha McGann, but 1719 and Holy Trinity Church was a centre for people. So it's not a historic site like a stately home where only the rich have an input in how the story is told. It's we have stories that run the whole gamut. And finding stories from people who maybe aren't what Mackem has been thought of for a long time has been a bit of a challenge. So
an important point that from a researching standpoint, like, it is essentially my job to research this stuff along with all of the other curious curators. It is practically impossible to find stories of Black and minority races heritage in Sunderland, and that's quite a unique thing for what was at one time one of the biggest ports in the world. So if anybody does have their heritage from the Black community, then please let us know, because genuinely this is an appeal for help. So you can see the trade history from Liverpool's heritage, but you can't really with Sunderland. And the main reason with that is Sunderland was a port, yes, but its main job was sending Mackems outwards, not welcoming others in. It built the ships that went other places. That's why you'll see, and the best indicator of this, coming back to football ever so slightly, is the signs in the Stadium of Light. There's a ring just around the bottom of the Premier Concourse of all different flags, all different nationalities, that all say things like Irish Mackems, Argentinian Mackems, Swedish Mackems, Bermudan Mackems. You get them from everywhere. And it's because Sunderland essentially spread its seed, for want of a better phrase, across the world. And that's why you get, I know, for example, I've been to somewhere called the Black Cat's Bar in Spain, in the south of Spain.
It's worth pointing out that the viewers of these videos aren't all UK based. That clearly one of the biggest exports from Sunderland is people from Sunderland.
It's people. Yeah.
Brilliant. So what we'll do now.
Sorry, world.
What we'll do now is we'll hear from. We've got a conversation with Katie Miller and Taisha McGann talking about inclusion and barriers to it in heritage. And then we've got a conversation with Anthony Holt from Sunderland Empire. He's talking about working with audiences who have autistic spectrum disorder and how the Empire championed that in the Northeast. And we'll see you at the end of that. Say goodbye. So welcome to Digital Picnics. Today we're talking about inclusion in history. And it's a difficult topic, but one that we're really keen to talk about and keen to sort of get to grips with. So today we're maybe not giving answers, we're maybe just asking a lot of questions, but that's part of being inclusive, is not pretending that you know all the answers. So here to admit that they don't know all the answers, we have Taisha McGann. Taisha.
I'm one of the curious curators kind of tackling this topic of inclusion in Sunderland.
Taisha is an excellent volunteer with the Curious Curators program and has came up with some really thought-provoking stories and also some thought-provoking gaps, like things that we just can't find. We also have Katie Mitchell.
I'm on the steering group for Space Invaders North, and Space Invaders is a network that started, and it's looking at campaigning for equal power and influence for women leading museums and heritage institutions, fair conditions, and also representation in the stories being told and the stories being communicated to audiences.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really good place for us to start. We're not talking necessarily about any group in particular, but representation as a starting point. Taisha, when you were looking at the cabinet of curiosities that you're helping curate, what drew you to the stories that you've started to look at?
It wasn't really anything in particular that I saw or read. I'm not from Sunderland, so when I found out that there's a large, it's got a long history of ports and docking and everything, and knowing England's the English Empire's history with the slave trade and so on, I just wanted to see if there's any correlation between things that happened in the past and the Sunderland that people experience today. it's been a journey to try and research, and it's also been very difficult. This is not necessarily for a negative way, but Sunderland and Northeast England in particular seems to be very inclusive in terms of how they approach diversity and how they approach people from ethnic minorities or people who we've kind of labeled as unseen. And that's great, but then, you know, that's only covering part of the story. So more recently, I've been trying to uncover more from a personal perspective, how people from the community feel, how they go about their daily lives, and how, like, whether or not they experience any kind of racial injustice, and whether or not that's tied into anything that's historically linked with Sunderland. So yeah, there's not really, it just kind of, I was curious about it, and I just kind of ran with it.
You curated your own.
You went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I just keep digging. It's crazy, and even like this, I went to actually Lily emailed me and said that there was a the Vanguard.
Haringey Vanguard.
Yes,
and it's part of the London Museums and Archives.
Yeah,
and they were looking at, I guess, because they were looking at the contribution of people of color in and around pride and gay rights activism, because those stories tend to get sidelined, and there's an idea that sort of those communities weren't present, weren't outspoken during those events, and that's just not the case.
we're talking about the riots in the 70s and the 80s. I was like, that's, you know, when you think of racial history, you tend to think like history, like going back 200 years and so on. But there's modern history that's also very effective. And I liked looking into that because you saw that there was important people in England or important movements, like all the protests that were happening. It was exactly what my research needs right now, is more of a personal anecdotes and people coming in and sharing their stories, because it's really nice to hear that there's an area that's very inclusive and is very, you know, diverse, and everybody's kind of like one big community melting pot. But at the same time, whose perspective is that written from? Is there bias involved, or is it an institution who wrote this and therefore they've got to be a bit more careful with how they word certain things? So yeah, at this point we just need to kind of get people's opinions out there. Experiences.
Absolutely. Katie, how does representation come into your work with Space Invaders?
It comes in a few different ways. So the steering group is made up of, well, we cover the North, so we run sort of the gamut in where we're from one side of the country to the other, and everyone has a very, very, very different role. So one of the things that we're looking at is developing working groups, and one of them is about interpretation and how to sort of not just spotlight women's stories but to elevate them to the same level that men's stories are. And part of that is using appropriate language, making sure that it's not detrimental to their story, or it doesn't put them down because of their station in society or whatever, things like that. So we're looking a little bit at interpretation. We're also looking at representation of women within the sector. There's a funny thing where the sector is predominantly women, but a lot of the leadership roles are men. So there seems to be sort of a career progression gap. Almost, you can get to a certain point and then getting that extra step further and being representative as a leader is quite a challenge for some women in the sector. So that's something we're sort of working on as well. We're still quite early days. We're a reasonably new group. It only just started that Space Invaders started having regional networks. So we started getting together, I want to say October last year, maybe. So it's all stuff that we're tackling, but change takes time. And it's big topics. a big area to look at. So
And the two
not
things,
necessarily answers, but questions.
yeah. Is the perspective of Space Invaders that those two things are linked? That if there were more women in leadership, there would be more diverse stories in museums and galleries?
I personally think there would be. We've had a lot of anecdotal stories from women that have joined our events, where a man might accept a role saying, well, I looked on the website, the entire staff is women, so I thought it'd be easy to progress. Things like that. So I think incentive to join the sector is very, very different for men and women. Not just taking that one story, but from other experiences as well. And men and women do think differently, I think. And I think there's different ways of engaging with the sector and different ways of, let me think, different ways of sort of how you want your organization to run and what you want your focus to be and how you want to engage with certain dialogues and certain communities and different stories and that sort of a thing. I think there's enough drive and discussion around making representation more inclusive and more accurate to the communities that we have. But in terms of the action that's happening, you see small pockets of it, but it's small pockets of it.
There's also an argument that says that if you do an exhibition or an event that is looking at one of those marginalized histories, that it won't be treated with the same level of respect as, I suppose, what could be called a normal exhibition, like an exhibition that looks at a straight white man. So there's a level of, you have to get someone into a position of power who wants to tell those stories. They have to be able to tell those stories and be able to find them, which Taisha and I are struggling to. And then you have to have them be able to do that in a voice that is loud enough and heard enough.
And respected enough as well. In a way that's not tokenistic, in a way that's accurate to the communities that you're representing. And a lot of that is sort of consultation and engaging with those communities. It's a different way of working because it hasn't been done as much up until now. Like I said, there's small pockets of work that's been done to showcase those stories, but it's not widespread and it's not standard practice, I wouldn't say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thinking about staying with like the history of like women's stories and women's voices, something that I've definitely noticed through lockdown is that women are sort of natural historians. The number of women who interact with our Facebook page and are finding things out about like family history and ancestry, it's really high. The interest and archival nature of it, like gathering family photos, hearing these stories. But at the same time, women who are willing to speak on behalf of themselves are few and far between. So what we found is that women aren't really willing to tell their stories to us because they sort of, I guess they've been told enough times that those stories aren't important or weren't relevant, and it's 2020 now. We're okay. We're okay, women, right? We're on some quite good ground, and we're still thinking like that. And you think, oh well, then of course we can't find an oral history from the 1960s about what it's like to be a woman in Sunderland. Like, of course, there's this gap.
I think it's like any kind of minority speaking up is sometimes it's like it's a bit it's not really the word I don't want to say repetitive, But, you know, a lot of people have experienced similar things. And in the media, when you see similar headlines, people kind of just go like, oh, this again, or like, it's just so typical, it's so stereotypical. But it's like, when are people going to understand that like it's repetitive and stereotypical because a lot of people experience similar things? It might be different, or it might be in it from a different perspective or from a different angle. But I mean, a lot of people from like a woman's perspective or a minority's perspective do experience, you know, prejudice or sexual harassment. And if it's in paper, then it's significant enough for people to take note of it. And when people discard it because it's kind of like, oh, this is all over the place now, this is happening all the time, well, then maybe instead of saying it like that, you should say, gosh, there's a real problem. How can we prevent things like this from appearing as newspaper articles all the time, you know? So I think there's a way people can approach that as well a bit better with a lot, like having a more of an open mind and an accepting mind to kind of enable people to feel comfortable. Or maybe not comfortable because sometimes it's a bit scary and stuff, but being able to at least to speak their mind and their experience, as opposed of them dreading and thinking, how is the public going to receive this? You know, because it's, who cares? I mean, you shouldn't be, that should be the last of your concern. Like it's, you know, so.
Yeah.
So
there needs to be sort of a forum and a space to sort of allow that. And there, for so many minoritized communities, it doesn't feel that way because historically there hasn't been. And carving that out and making sure places that don't reflect them are considered safe spaces, and places that don't necessarily tell their story or their history are welcoming and open to them. Having that dialogue between communities and institutions, it's hard work, but it's needed. It's very, very, very needed.
a hard question, but can you think of any examples of that in practice? Those safe dialogues.
Can I say a bit? Well, I don't think it's controversial. But decolonizing collections. Esme Ward from Manchester Museum gave back items from their collection to the communities that they were taken from through colonialism and all this other stuff. Gestures and acts like that, to me, it shows you're putting people over your organization. You're putting communities over your organization. You're not thinking, well, maybe it's got historical significance to Manchester, and maybe we need to check the acquisition records and da-da-da-da-da. Just give it, you took it, give it back. And it's acknowledging the history of it as well, and acknowledging this was wrong in the first place. And it sort of speaks to an organization's values, and I think the leadership values trickle down through an organization and often can be seen in their entire staff. So to me, gestures like that are quite key in the wider dialogue.
I think there's also this attitude about Sunderland's history that because it was a shipbuilding port and not like a trade port, that it didn't have any part in the slave trade. But there's a great quote from, I think it's Ta-Nehisi Coates, who says, the medium of slavery is water. Like the medium of slavery was the British Navy. And if Sunderland had a role in that, it had a role in slavery. And to ignore that is wild. There are even like a number of noted, the word where you protested slavery. Abolitionists from Sunderland, including sailors. And while you shouldn't just purely focus on abolitionists because people who were enslaved also had a large role in becoming unenslaved, that's still part of Sunderland's heritage. Mm-hmm. And in a way, is sad not to celebrate. Like,
that's something to be intensely proud of. And the relationship that Sunderland has with Celestine Edwards, the first known Black British newspaper editor, was really well received in Sunderland. His contribution went down really brilliantly. He spoke publicly, like frequently in Sunderland. Not celebrating these things sort of creates this mist of like that we shouldn't be proud of that we shouldn't.
There's a funny thing about how it's been branded and labeled as contentious histories. Anything is contentious if you look at it from an alternative perspective, really. If you take a different approach to the one that the institution communicating the information is, you can make it contentious. To me, it's just it is history. It is the country's history. It is the city's history. And by throwing this contentious in front of it, it's giving permission to say, well, I don't know, it's a bit risky. I don't know if we should talk about that. And it's giving yourself a loophole to take it out of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And colonialism, like you're absolutely right. There's abolitionists, there's loads of different stories from all different perspectives in there. It's not just Britain ran the slave trade. Like, it's not just that. That's part of it. That's a big part of it. But there's all sorts of other stories that can be told as well. And it's looking at all of those with equal value.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in a way, there's something really exciting about 1719, because the stories that it tells as a building are like everyday stories of everyday people getting married and going to church, and it's not a stately home with no links to the community around it.
Yeah, no, I think
The absolute dream would be that there's someone watching this who has a story, whether it's theirs or even just like anecdotal, like, or family history, that would tell the story of Sunderland from a different perspective. What would you say to them or tell them about getting their story heard? How can we help them?
My thing is, it's when it's your story, you're familiar with it, and you probably think, well, that's just what's happened. It's not like that with everybody else. It's a new story, and it will be engaging and interesting, and it will 100% be something they don't know already. And I think that's really important. Everyone's story is completely different, and everyone's story has value. Get it out there.
I think it can help to kind of piece together more or add layers to the narrative of Sunderland that already exists. And you can enrich the history of the city, even if it's recent history, through your own experiences and perspective, because ultimately that's what history was. It's just people putting in their diaries what they've done and, helping kind of unfold the narrative in that sense. So I think, as daunting and as intimidating as it is sometimes to kind of pour your heart out to people that you don't know, I think it's really worth doing, because it's so helpful not only to educate the community and people that are unaware, but also for the all around good of the area. So
absolutely, that's brilliant. Is there anything else from your research in the cabinet of curiosities that you want to?
Oh, I think too. I think it's important to mention that we've talked a lot. I think the main groups that have been mentioned so far are like women and groups that have been involved in the slave trade, but there's so many other underrepresented groups in the area. So even if your group hasn't been mentioned, I'm speaking for everybody here, but sorry, but feel free to comment anyways, or to send Lily or anybody an email, because any story is relevant. So even if you've got a different past, feel free to share.
Yeah.
But also, I'm just going to add one last thing. I'm so sorry. I would also say if you don't know your family history, ask about it, and take that step and create that dialogue. And I'm saying this partly from personal experience. My mom didn't look past her parents for her family history, and when she did, it was insane. It's worth doing. Find out where you came from, find out where you have links to. It might be different countries, different regions, different ethnicities. It will be a whole world that you haven't explored yet. It's worth doing.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. So I'm here with Anthony Hope from Sunderland Empire. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you do, Hope?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, everyone calls me Hope. I'm the Creative Learning and Community Partnerships Manager at the Sunderland Empire. And basically what our job is there to do is to bridge the gap between the community that we serve in the city of Sunderland and the venue. Because our venue can be quite intimidating to a lot of people. It doesn't feel sometimes like it's the place for everyone, but it totally is. We really want everyone to feel like our venue is there for everyone. It's owned by the council, so technically it is owned by the people of Sunderland. So essentially it is there for everyone to utilise. And we're really there to address local need, what is needed in the city, and how can we use the creative arts to engage anyone from preschool right the way up to older people. How can we get them connected to the venue and feel like that space is totally for them and somewhere where they can express themselves creatively? So that's essentially what we're there and try to do.
Oh, fantastic. Because one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you specifically is because I know that Sunderland Empire is like this, it's like a real powerhouse of inclusion in Sunderland. You do a lot of work about not just getting people into the building, but getting other venues to understand the importance of like breaking down those barriers and making sure, not just implying this is a space for everyone, but saying it out loud and making sure that everyone knows that they're welcome in those spaces. And I just wondered, like, what form does that take now during lockdown? How do you be inclusive when you can't say this is a building for everyone, come in?
I know the doors are absolutely firmly locked at the moment, which is so sad. I don't think our building doors have been locked this long since inception in 1907. So it's a real big time in history in for the venue as well. So it's really challenging, and you're right, we want to be as inclusive as possible. We have developed a specialism in autism specifically in the venue, so a lot of our work revolves around really championing that work and really being as inclusive as we possibly can. And like I say, it came from an area of need. We were one of the first performance venues in the north to put on a relaxed performance, which is essentially a performance that caters to people with additional needs such as autism, such as dementia, ADHD, young children who've never been to a performance before. So we were really pushing that to be a moment to try and show everyone that actually we can do this. This is something that is really doable, and it was challenging, absolutely. But we had really great support from North East Autism Society, who really helped guide us through that process of putting on that performance. And since we put on that first relaxed performance, it's grew year on year. Our audiences has developed massively. So we are now engaging a whole new sector of the community that has never really felt like that space was available to them, or that their children or families would be able to cope with the performance. So it's been really great to provide that space for families and people in the region, really. So that's been fantastic. And through the work that we've done with young people and adults with autism, it's stemmed into our creative and participation engagement as well. It's not just the shows that we put on. Okay, we've done that. What else can we do? There's still a need out there. There's not a lot of provision for these young people or adults with additional needs. So through that, we developed the theatre offer for young people with additional needs, where that's been running for 7 years now. So crazy.
Oh, is that long? That's incredible.
I know, it's crazy. And I've seen those young people grow up through that group, and it's been incredible how much it's benefited them and how their parents have been so surprised on actually how their young person's been able to grow through being involved in this group. And the parents have really benefited for being able to talk to other parents who have children with additional needs, and they have formed their own sort of support group for themselves as well. So it's had kind of outcomes surpassing what we initially thought of that group, which was amazing. But what we discovered as well is that actually after the age of 18, what is available for adults with additional needs, and essentially there's nothing at all. A lot of the adults who have additional needs spend time at home in their rooms. They don't really get to see any other people. So we wanted to really try and fill that gap as well, because it seemed that there was a great need for it. So we now have an adult group for adults with additional needs who join us for a full day on a Monday, and are their own theatre company, essentially, who devise and create performances, which we've took on recently. So that's been run for about 2 years now. So it's still developing. We're not really hitting everyone. We would wish we could, but we want to make sure as many people know that this service is available for them as possible. So that's kind of how our work with autism specifically has developed. And we also wanted to share that expertise with the wider sector and the wider city as well. So when we had Curious Incident with the National Theatre, Tour to the Empire, which is a performance about a young boy with autism and how the world is through his eyes, we wanted to really make that a moment of actually how can we make people across the city where the creative arts is totally accessible for young people with additional needs. So we worked with a lot of cultural organisations. So we worked with the Northern Gallery for Contemporary Art, we worked with the Museum of Winter Gardens, we worked with the Arts Centre in Washington in providing training on how they can make their work accessible to a wider range of audiences. And yeah, and that kind of developed over a whole summer where we did creative activities through the summer holidays for families with young people with additional needs, and it was really well received. We got really great attendances to a lot of those events, and it enabled those organisations to then further develop their offer going forward, which we've started to see as well, which is fantastic.
Can you take us back to like 7 years ago? That group formed. You were the first venue in the Northeast to do relaxed performances. What was it? What was that like? Like,
it was a lot of pressure to get it right, because I think with this audience specifically, it can do more harm if you don't do it right than anything else. So we were really under a lot of pressure we want to make this right. We don't want to put anyone off. We don't want to make this experience bad, that actually it's going to put this group of people off creative arts for the rest of their lives. That's definitely not what we wanted to do. But we wanted to do it because it needed to be done. So yeah, a lot of pressure at first, but like I say, we got so much support from partners, from families. We went to a lot of family groups across the Northeast and just talked to parents, like, how can we make this good for you? Because every child is so different and everyone's needs are so different. It's really hard to do a massive blanket to cover everyone's specific needs. It's just totally not possible. But what we did is we listened and we heard a lot of stories, and we took a lot of kind of information away from families and how can we make it as accessible as we possibly could, which was challenging, but we really wanted to hear from those individual people to feel like their voices were heard and their stories were heard. And yeah, we really hope that we've been able to kind of implement that, I suppose. But still, it's ongoing. It's always an interesting road, but yeah, we continue to develop, and we are no means masters of this by any means. We're still challenging ourselves and questioning ourselves and what we can do better and what we can do more of, and there's always that. So yeah, it's still a road to kind of get in there, I suppose.
But I think that way of working, of questioning and reflecting and consulting, and that can be that's in itself is an expertise. Like there aren't many practitioners who would be so willing to do that hard work. Like, not that you're selling yourself short, but I think you need to take the win there. That's expertise.
I mean, we do what we can. We just want to listen to people, and at the end of the day, we're here to serve the local people, and we can't serve them if we don't speak to them We can't just put things on expecting, well, that's what everyone needs. We don't need to talk to anyone. Let's just do it and hope for the best. I think, yeah, to make it meaningful and make it impactful, we really need to consult with them and talk to them, because they are the experts. At the end of the day, we need to learn from them.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. When you came back from, because you were furloughed during the first lockdown, weren't you?
Yes. So furloughed since March. We got sent home since the venues closed. And then I was brought back not until October to do some part-time work, and then that's been continued essentially up until now on 2 days a week. So it's been really challenging for the breadth of work that we deliver as a department. Coming back solo from a team of 3 has had its challenges, absolutely, but it's enabled us to really address those groups who are most in need. So we've been able to transfer our group of our youth theatre for young people with additional needs to come back and do their sessions digitally, which is amazing, because like I say, these people, especially in lockdown, are some of the people most in need, and their parents have been like, thank you so much. They've been asking every day when can they come back, which is really lovely to hear that those young people really need this as well. So to be able to continue to provide that provision for them has been unreal, and I'm so happy that we've been able to set that up. But there's still many people that we engage that we can't at the moment, which is a struggle. So I'm hoping as the months go on and we get into a more healthy position, we can start to bring some of our other groups back, because there's lots of them, bless them.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel a bit fired up. If anyone else at home is feeling like, I want to get involved, I want to become part of this, where do they find you? How do they get involved?
Absolutely, because we are still welcoming people. If you know anyone who would be totally up this street and they're a young person with additional needs who is looking for something like this, then we do have availability. We've got funding up until July, so there's no cost at the moment to the group, which is great. So it's totally accessible for a wide range of people. So do get in touch. My information will be on the Sunderland Empire website. It'll be on the Facebook page. We have a creative learning Facebook page, which is Sunderland Empire Creative Learning, which has all of our contact information on there, and that's where you can best find all the info. Or you can email me at anthonyhope@theambassadors.com, which is my work email address. If anyone's got any further questions, I'm really welcoming people to get in contact for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hope.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Okay. Right. Thank you to our guest speakers for coming and sharing their work. I really enjoyed talking to everyone. Before we go, we just wanted to talk a little bit about what maybe the future of inclusion in Sunderland looks like from our work onwards. So Alex, I know that you've been looking at sort of the data around Islamophobia in the Northeast, and some really interesting stuff happening, right?
Yeah, well, it's in Britain as a whole, there's still a very negative connotation about the word Muslim, which is disgraceful in my view. You get a lot of it in the media. So, for example, if a Muslim person does something wrong, it will be in the title that a Muslim person does something wrong. You know, and for anyone watching who's thinking, well, why is that a problem? It's like, well, do you ever see a title saying that Christian Prime Minister Boris Johnson, or, you know, or anything like that, Protestant individual kicks pub window in? You don't see that sort of stuff. It's only when it's people who follow Islam or of a religious group that is not the 70% majority of this country. And it's still a thing to see, even in Sunderland, where I like to think that we're quite enlightened, but you know, you can't
There's always room for improvement.
Yeah, exactly. You can't judge the entirety without recognizing the few, I'll just say it, idiots who believe that somebody's race, religion, creed, or color is a point of ridicule or judgment. So when I was looking at these figures, I discovered that between 2009 and 2012 in Sunderland, there was a search done by a company called Arch, ARCH, that looked into hate crimes concerning race, religion, sexuality, disability, transgender status, things like that. And 82% of the reports that they received was something to do with race and religion. 82%. Now, if you think about that,
That's
this isn't a small number. Sorry.
That's legitimately shocking.
Yeah, there isn't a small number of these things done either. It's a like, I won't give out the details, but it's a large proportion of the population that took part in this. And the thing that they found that was causing a lot of it was language and behavior. So things like, I've seen, and this is another point about studying or looking into Muslims in Sunderland, right? I've done research on Sikhism and found a genuine page of the history of Sikhism in Sunderland, all peaceful, all just facts and figures, nothing bad. I found the same with Judaism. With Muslims, I took 6 pages of Google searches to get to a headline in the news that wasn't about some sort of crime that just happened to be caused by somebody who follows Islam. And that is a serious problem that I dare say I'm part of the media now. I will not be proponing at all, because it doesn't matter, and it's disgraceful, to be quite honest, that you feel the need to point out somebody's minor details. If people started doing that with me, like if somebody copied that onto something else, and it's like, Ginger podcast, yes, I've got red hair, I can't help it, I've got ginger hair, live with it, but picking out somebody's minutest details as a form of identification and judgment it's just absurd. But on a slightly more light note, you might say, these facts and figures weren't all doom and gloom and negatives, and certain parts of it genuinely made me feel positive about Sunderland again, and its reaction to Islamophobia and hate crimes. And one of the biggest things that this study discovered about the importance of xeno-racism is that education is highly important. For example, I have never claimed to be the most educated on every single diversity issue in the world. I've never claimed that, and I never will, because quite honestly, there's not enough time to study it all in one's lifetime. But education is the absolute key to preventing this thing in the future. And it's through youth education and younger generations that discuss this stuff. Younger generations discuss how to react to this sort of thing and go out and do things, rather than just seeing a report on the news and thinking that it's in some way, oh, that's great, what's the football score? Like, that's and I'm not typecasting all people of a certain generation here with the same brush. I'm not tanning them all with the same brush at all. But there is a higher correlation, a noted higher correlation in younger generations that consider these sorts of things. And there was a table that I came across that really sort of both frightened me in certain ways, because some of the things that people took upon themselves with the best of intentions were quite scary, but some of them were very positive. So, for example, some 26.7% of non-Muslim residents in Sunderland have admitted to editing their behavior based on Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred. So in Sunderland, there were 5 in 2019. There were 5 far-right or Islamophobic rallies, I suppose you could call them. And the Northeast had the most in the country, and that really scared me. But looking at the things that genuinely reasonable people have done to combat this, so for example, challenging ideas and addressing discrimination in everyday life, which is something that we all should do. I know that in my life I have pulled people up on racist or sexist or discriminatory comments. I also have not, when I should have. But through educating myself and becoming more confident in myself, I do it more often because I know that I'm on the side of right in that. And anybody watching this that sees that, you should know that you are on the side of right. 90, if not 95% of people are completely behind your stance of saying, hey, you don't say that, or you don't refer to it as that, or you don't speak about an entire people based on its worst group. And there's a lot of evidence that people in Sunderland are doing that. Things like being more aware of Islamophobic tendencies and looking out for the signs of racism. Things like challenging young students to question how they react. And honestly, children are the most inspirational thing when it comes to this, because hatred is taught. It is not intrinsic. It is not based into all of us. There are certain people that you may believe are born evil. Anybody who's watched enough Netflix will know that there are certain people who are just born evil. But in 90% of people, there is just good and zero hatred for people. You don't see, children who aren't taught to hate hating. You just don't see it. I've never come across it in my life. And furthermore, on that, things like educating family and friends, things like joining anti-racist organizations. I know that I've looked into doing that several times. I've joined a few, and I've looked into joining more since, and trying to represent an anti-racist stance in my life. Not that I need to walk around and look for racism, obviously. I don't walk the streets and look for horrid people to pull up. If I did, I'd get killed. But no, but I don't go walking into fights. But if I come across these sorts of things, I try to
speak up and speak out.
Yeah, to speak up and to help, and that's the simplest thing that we can all do.
Mm-hmm.
And reading these things, there was one that really scared me, where they said that somebody admitted to carrying a knife while out with a Muslim friend, not because they felt unsafe with the individual who was Muslim, because they felt unsafe because of the people around them, and that's frightening. You don't want to be a contributor to that sort of fear. You don't want to live in fear. There's enough fear and division around at the moment. You don't need to add to it.
Very well said. I think obviously we operate like a zero tolerance policy on hate speech in everything that we do, and try and make sure that these spaces are as inclusive as possible. And what we're doing is in the Cabinet of Curiosities, and then lots of other projects, is trying to find those stories. So to that end, we're next week's digital picnic will be an interview.
Sorry. That's both of us.
Next week's interview will be an interview with author Nancy Revel, talking about her series of novels based on historical research of Sunderland and the East End. They're called the Shipyard Girls. It's called the Shipyard Girls, and we're really excited to have Nancy with us next week. If you have a story of a woman in Sunderland, we're trying to celebrate International Women's Day, which I think is Monday, and we want to hear those stories that maybe you thought were unimportant or weren't sure if anyone wanted to hear. We absolutely do. So if you share your story with us via email, in the comments below, in a message, however, by carrier pigeon,
smoke signal.
You
can write it on the town wall. You can fold it up into a paper airplane and throw it at our heads. Just get it to us. We're interested.
Yeah, we really, really want to hear them. And we've got two prizes. We've got a signed copy of Nancy Revel's book. We also have a signed copy of Glenda Young's The Paper Mill Girl. which will be coming out mid-March. So we'll be announcing the winners next week in the digital picnic, but do share your stories and do share your comments on how you think we can make the story of Sunderland be told by as many different voices as possible, because that's our job.
Yes, yes it is.
That's goodbye from me and award-winning Alex.
It's goodbye from me and it's goodbye from her.
Next time. Bye.
Bye.